Good morning. My name is Itumeleng Waluhulere, convener of the Factory of the Arts. We invited Phokeng Setai to come and have a conversation, an informal conversation with academics and artists that are here today. We invited a couple of artists to come and join us in our conversation. Therefore, I just want to welcome Phokeng to Yatsiba Lab again. And most of us here know Phokeng. We have worked with him before. Welcome, my brother. And over to you, my brother. Thank you.
Over to Itumeleng. Thanks for staying with me on the stage. It's a bit weird for me to be sitting in front of you and to talk about my practice, which was a very interesting kind of like proposal that when you sent it, when I got that message from you, I was like, oh, this is a bit interesting for me, but I'm not gonna decline it because I wanted to challenge myself to speak to you guys about the work that I've been doing, and also because I have this complex when I speak to the CHR people in particular. You guys know me so well. I I can like scam the entire world out there, but I can't necessarily scam you. That's what I've been doing for the last 2 years, scamming the rest of the South African art world. But yeah, with you guys, it's very different because you know me so well. I was made by the CHR. I remember when I came from and UWC when I came from Bloemfontein, having studied my master's there in sociology in a program called the Narrative Study of Lives. When I arrived at the CHR, I felt like the first 2.5 years while I was doing an MPhil. Everything that I thought I knew was completely displaced and rocked. I felt really small in the department as well. I was scared to speak even because of the many brilliant minds that I would share the space with. So ever since then, I think I've just grown leaps and bounds as a thinker and a practitioner. And my intention always when I arrived at the CHR was not just to be an academic or theoretician, but also to combine practice. And yeah, I guess this presentation will be me talking about largely the work that I've done and some of the I guess ideas that have come across in my work that I picked up here at the CHR. And I liked how you called it an informal presentation because it will be really informal and also quite self-referential because it will be about the work that I've been doing in collaboration with other people. I guess it doesn't necessarily begin with this project. It begins with in 2020 when we start a project called About Time, about 00 Time. Some of you might remember that project, which was a digital cultural website that myself and Professor Anais Noni now founded after having spent time in the Maibuya archives. And like just before the pandemic, so we realized in digging in this archive, and this was before what Primesh calls the digital stampede, or maybe at the very beginning of that digital stampede, we were kind of like just got on that curve at the right time, and so we created this Instagram page where we would create stories from the content that we found inside the archive, because we had realized that this archive is not accessible unless you're able to enter it physically, but online there wasn't really much out there. And so alongside this digital archive called About Time, named after an exhibition that was meant to, or actually opened at GCT, I think in 87, but closed down after one day. Some of the questions that we arose from knowing about this history is that this exhibition opened one day, closed the next day because of I think it was the second state of emergency. We asked ourselves what kinds of histories were prevented from being known just from the closure of this one exhibition. Kinds of artworks were not seen by a lot of people because of the closure of this exhibition. So we kind of like took that as a starting point and a point of departure to start interrogating the Mayibuya archive per se, but also African cultural history that wasn't really known or as visible out there, especially now with the world having soon after the pandemic and the lockdown entered this digital kind of era. We found it to be our responsibility to also kind of like contribute to that work. And then alongside that, I'm just giving you guys some context around like how the practical or the practice really forms around this year 2020. We also start a project space called Mothership Landing in Salt River. Some of you may remember that project space. I was using money that I was being paid as a smoker, and some of the money I was being getting from the CHR to fund that project space. And the intention behind that space was to create a space where Black artists, artists of color, can produce work from. And we also were doing some programming. So we would have an opening, which would be on a Saturday. Then on the Thursday, we had an event called Dedicated Thursday, which we dedicated to just deep house, house music. And then we would close with a podcast, kind of open access podcast. We would invite people like this to join in on a conversation that took on a panel format, and then the members of the audience would also be able to like kind of contribute to the conversation. So this was the year 2020, and then towards the end of that year, I started a conversation with my collaborator in Exhibition Match. His name is Alexander Richards. He's one of the directors at Stevenson Art Gallery. And that was also kind of a conversation based on what the simple pleasures that we took from life at the time, I guess, enjoying football, us both being Arsenal supporters, working in the art world, and also having this space to kind of like activate and do things from. A year afterwards, like that's when the first iteration of Exhibition Match happens. Exhibition Match is a social, we call it a social intervention artistic project that uses the language of football as a way to drive publics in football into the art space and vice versa. So this is an image of the kit that we designed for Exhibition Match, his first iteration, but I'll explain more about the project. So Exhibition Match has 3 components. Excuse me. It's we have an exhibition where the artworks that are shown in the exhibition are either made with football as a lens, or speak to what's happening in the world through kind of like the events in football. So it's like the aesthetics of football used through like art practices or art making, the lens of art making, to comment about social politics. So we have an exhibition that does that with artworks that kind of like do this kind of thing. And then secondly, we have a football match. And I remember, Primesh, you've been to one of them. I think it was last year, where we have actants in the art world, such as collectors who, without them, there wouldn't be an art ecosystem to begin with, because they kind of like produce, like they kind of like circulate the money from like funding the artists. So we have collectors, galleries also being involved. So gallerists, art administrators, art handlers, curators, and artists playing like a football match with each other, right? Yeah. Anyway, so there's that, and then we have lastly, we have a football kit designed by an artist, and so like the players would wear this kit. So it's like this. Yeah, I think we also called it in the beginning. We called it a social sculpture for some time, and now we're calling it perhaps arguably one of the biggest artistic collectives, not only in South Africa. I know it's a big claim, perhaps in the world, just because of how the project unfolds. Like so many people will get involved. So the idea behind this first iteration was just to make this dream that Alex and I shared happen. We had like a members lounge. I don't know if I have an image of that. A members lounge where we showed like all kinds of like football paraphernalia, like some of those paintings that you find in barber shops that like reference like hairstyles by Ronaldo, the original Luis Ronaldo, the original number 9, and all these other figures. So that artwork on the right, my right, is by Peter Hugo, who did like a series on like football supporters. Then you have a Penny CO piece artwork there with the Ronaldo number 9. I think that's from a Pinky Pinky series. And in that TV monitor there, it's an artwork by Robin Roda, of 2 people kicking a ball to each other. And then we have like another artwork can't remember the artist now, but it's of a football keeper. Uh, I think the photographer was watching a game in his in his I guess his neighborhood, and he just took that image of a goalkeeper. But the balls there are from each iteration of a big FIFA football tournament, I think from the year '78. And all these artworks we got from different, we loaned at no cost to us from different like people in the community. It was surprising how much support we got from that. And then fast forward to the second iteration, when initially with the first iteration, we thought that this would be a once-off project and it wouldn't go any further. But from the kind of like support we got from the public, we realized that this thing has some legs. So the second iteration, this is a still we took from like the video installation of Francis Alice's work. But this iteration took place on the rooftop of the Grand Central Station in the Cape Town CBD. And the theme around the second iteration of exhibition match was football and the city. And so we were looking at the urban infrastructure, but also how football, when it arrived, it came through like the port area, but like it was used to kind of like expand the colonial mission in in, into the interior of like the of many African countries. So we're taking this as I guess like a point of departure once again to think about the football in the city, and also we learned that one of the first football game on South Africa happened at Greenpoint. I can't remember the name of the garden now. The garden now in Greenpoint, which is near the light tower. But yeah, we're thinking about all these connections that football had to like the building or the making of like urban spaces. And so the three video artworks that we got from the artists were also had something to do with like football being played in either a train track or like a railway area, which was a Simon Gash artwork that I don't have here. This Francis Alice artwork was of these kids kicking a ball that's on fire in their neighborhood. And then lastly, we had a work by Mariana Simnet, and the protagonist was kicking a ball against the wall. And these videos were playing alongside people playing the game. And it was like we had kids skating, and it was just like a wonderful moment for people to come together at the time. And the kit that was designed for this iteration is by Robin Roda, an artwork by Robin Roda called Evergreen. And you'll see he's got this lawnmower against a wall, and like he does this like lawn kind of like artwork on the kit. And then I think what became to this day one of our most impactful uh, kind of interventions happened at FNB Joburg in 2023. Um, and the theme here was football, art, and politics. The idea behind this iteration came from a conversation that we had with Kendall Gears. And we had that conversation on the 16th of June, 2023. The fair would happen like, 3 months later. And in that conversation, he told us about this work that hadn't been shown in the country before. Um, and it basically came from what's, at least he, according to his research, is claimed to be the origins of football, which are said to have happened in the Mayan kingdom, where for those people who were getting sacrificed and their heads would get decapitated and then kicked around as footballs, and then the game of football kind of like began around this like very gory like practice. So Kendall then produces this work based off of this like history, and then the work is basically footballs with presidents' masks being like wrapped onto them. And yeah, like we had a booth at the fair, and we invited publics that came to the fair to kick around their heads in the booth. This was a very disruptive work for multiple reasons. It created a lot of noise. Um, the artworks that were in the booths next to us were constantly like falling off of the walls. We caused a lot of trouble from this work, and also interestingly enough, this young man or young boy who came through this is a picture of him on the first day of the fair. So like the very first day, he came back on the Sunday, the last day, wearing a Real Madrid jersey to kick the balls again. So we're just, and I think it was at this moment that we realized what the project, or started understanding more what the project was doing. It was a way, like I said earlier on, like to bring publics into the art space. So it was a very literal way of like bridging the gap between art and the greater public out there. And also at art fairs, there is I guess like a shortage, or shortage of like interactive artworks. So this was the only interactive work at the fair at the time, especially also it being that disruptive. It kind of like created like a good publicity for us. And then we move on to what became our fourth iteration, which we held at One Park. The I guess this one was I can't remember what we interrogated. Yes, we were looking at moments of like conflict on the pitch between football players. So this is the famous Zidane and Marco Materazzi incident from I think it was the 2006 World Cup. But we're looking at all these other moments of fracas on the pitch between football players. And in other outbreaks that I didn't, images of which I didn't bring here, Kellen, who was the artist of choice in that iteration, had like kind of like free Palestine iconography, like subtly kind of like represented on the kits of the players. So it was for us it was really an interesting moment for us to be thinking about global conflict, but also in ways that were palatable for like large groups of large publics, if I can put it like that. It was the easy way to there's something digest. There's something playful about the style of Kellen's visual vocabulary in terms of him as a painter that allowed for people to kind of interact with these works easily and speak about certain thematics that were in the presentation. We're looking at global conflict at large, but also looking at it through the lens of like for how it happens on the football pitch, as a microcosm. So he then designed the kit for that, which was which was which was a reference. He referenced his the team that his uncle used to play for, Manning Rangers. So it was also a moment for us to look at like this archival research, think about the history of Manning Rangers, think about the history of like non-white football in South Africa, especially under apartheid. So this iteration featured all of these like historical or archival kind of like research that we bring into the project. So this was the fourth iteration, so looking at global conflict, looking at the history of non-racial football in South Africa, and we produced like a small text for that to contextualize what this iteration was about. And then this was a project we did as exhibition match again in Dakar. So we received funding from Institute Francais, and I think they gave us like 200,000. And in that, with that 200,000, we made 4 iterations. One in Cape Town, which I just spoke about. Oh yeah, just to go back to so another important thing about this moment was that we chose to have the exhibition at One Park because um, usually at the opening night of the fair, people go to an after party, which is usually held at in Greenpoint at a place called Strangers Club. And One Park being the soundbar, which is very popular with people. Our timing was just right that time, where we asked to open the exhibition on the evening of right after the vernissage, and this turned out to be one of the most well attended after parties, unofficial after parties of the fair. But it was again a moment for people to have a good time, interact with art, and have a serious conversation if they so pleased. This is from Dakar last year, May. We produced this work. No, so this ended up being the work, in fact. And that flag behind us is work by Mishak Gaba called the United African Nations. It's this like assemblage of like African flags of African countries all together to make this like kaleidoscopic visual. Um, the kit was designed by David Alabo, who's seated in front. We had like some practical problems once we got to Dakar. So the artworks that were meant to be shown were this flag and two films. One was by Tenjue Nkosi, which was an archival film of like the Commonwealth Games in, I can't remember which country, but we're going to show that alongside this. On the day of the presentation or the exhibition opening, the power wasn't working. So we had to think on our feet, and we asked, we got a photographer to like just take this image. And like to this day, this is like a really iconic image in like kind of the short history of exhibition match, but it really does like symbolize this like moment of unity between people from like different parts of Africa, but also the world. So I just want to pause here because in talking about exhibition match, just to give you, I guess, to dive deeper into like what's been a developing practice that I've been developing. It's hard to even speak about it in that way, but I see the more one like produces work, it takes on a certain kind of like form and language. So then a practice starts like taking shape. But I'll just put this picture on the screen. So um, last year, I did a residency with Fundación Sanreto Rerobodengo, which is owned by Miss Patrizia Rerobodengo, who's an Italian like baroness, who has this residency between Turin and Madrid. So I did the Madrid um, residency. So basically, what that entails is that I'm there for 3 months with two other curators from two different parts of the world. The one was from New Delhi, name is Kaushal Sapre, and then the other one is Nikki Nita Ramirez, who was from New York but living in London. So we come together to live in this house, spend 3 months, 3 months with one another, and kind of like produce an exhibition at the end of those 3 months. It's like a Big Brother episode, to be honest. And then during this time, we did over 100 studio visits, like over 100 studio visits with artists from Spain, traveled to Valencia, Barcelona, and a lot of studio visits in Madrid. And so we could realize that this is an impossible task to produce a coherent exhibition with so little time, getting to know the people that you're working with, getting to know the ecosystem, and then like produce something that's with inequality. And during our visit to Barcelona, we came across La Sagrada Familia, which is this church that's been under construction for over 100 years. And we were like, the people in this country are able to live with unfinished things. And like, and I think many of us, if we think about like the urban landscape, so much of it is unfinished or under construction. And like, why then are we putting so much pressure on ourselves to finish this thing when it's already impossible to produce anything that's worth like, yeah, like that's finished. So we took this as our point of reference, and we did an exhibition about unfinished things, which we called La Sagrada Familia, is under construction at this building where Cervantes used to, and other writers during this time in Spain would come and like meet, a social club for writers and artists. And we wanted to actually erect a scaffolding in front of the building, but that was declined. But yeah, I don't have images of the exhibition itself here, but like we built like we did a mock of the Spanish Ministry of Agriculture using crates. Like it was just like a very like lo-fi under construction exhibition, which was received too much too much of my surprise to us. But then I'm only mentioning this to speak about what then became a research project that I developed from this kind of like I guess interest, and also yeah, I guess discrepancy in like what is expected from you and what you can actually produce in a given set of time. I was in Spain at the time, so this went to Dakar to do the exhibition that I just spoke about with the flag, and then when I came back to Madrid, I started noticing scaffolding all around me. There was something about, yeah, it kind of looks nice to me. I don't know what you guys think, but like there's something like appealing about like this debris netting on the facade of a building that I was like, mm, how can we think about public space art in the same way where like we, yeah, it's like in the same way we can live with scaffolding when this building under construction, how can we just think about public space art? Because one thing that we also think about in exhibition match, and myself in particular as a practitioner, is how can we show art outside of its original context more and more? So I was like, this for me has artistic appeal. There's or aesthetic appeal at least. How can we think about this art in the public space, especially in a context such as ours in South Africa and the African continent at large, in similar ways? So yeah, just images of that. And then when I got an opportunity to go to Lagos and further this question, I spent time at guest artist space last year. This time, in fact, to kind of push this question further of scaffolding as a way into thinking, yeah, more broadly about public space art, public space interventions. Uh, the idea there was to do some kind of like installation, but due to the time, it was only 3 weeks. I couldn't get to that. But you see, marketing or advertising like agencies use the same language when they like do billboards. So there is a relationship there between like public messaging and like the technical infrastructure of a scaffold or a scaffolding infrastructure that can be applied. So I was like trying to think about like convergences between these two things. And yeah, like like noticing how scaffolding in Lagos is usually used takes a form of like bamboo sticks. Um, and depending on which part of Lagos, if you're on the island of Lagos, like Lekki Village and so forth, there is like a hybrid kind of steel and steel and bamboo. So you could tell which part of Lagos you are with it. If it's just still like kind of in a more affluent area of the city, if there's hybrid, they like semi kind of affluent, and then if it's just bamboo, like yeah, you were in Lagos mainland. So yeah, just picking up these kind of different languages in the use of this technology, and then that comes to it brings another departure, I guess, from what I just showed you. But I go back to the scaffolding question or point in the next slide. So again, in using football as a lens to disrupt the outworld or outworld logics in a sense, we do this performance directed by Tutuka CBC at last year's Joburg Art Fair. Using the French's money, we kind of asked Tutuka to direct this performance. We were thinking about football atmospherics. So kind of the noises you hear in the game when players kick the ball, how players prepare for a football match, the advertising boards, and all of these things that like revolve around the game itself. We were looking into, and so Tutuka made this performance. I should have actually put the video here. Um, that happened at the very beginning of the vernissage, and it was yeah like something a departure from what we would usually do, where we would have like a booth or a traditional exhibition. This was like the the offering that we gave, and then you'll see there's a remnant of what, or at least an aspect of the football pitch, like the corner flag. It was also a moment for us to pay attention to the supporter, the people who make the game possible or interesting. And the same way as in the art world itself, it's the people who find art interesting, the people who support it, that make it what it is. So we were just doing this like honoring of these other people that make the art art ecosystem what it is. And now to go back to so that interest that I had kind of been like thinking through in the scaffolding language, we kind of found its like I guess most formalized articulation in our eighth iteration, which we did in Maseru in Lesotho. Um, we worked with the artist Tato Tweba, who just recently got the prize for Young Artist of the Year. She was working on Ntate MT Ramakatane's photographic archive Mr. MT, that MT Ramagatane used to have a studio in Lesotho and worked primarily between the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so Tato, being a collage artist who works strongly with art archive, kind of did this like collage for us, um, and in collaboration with us, which we then showed on a billboard in Maseu. It was actually like it cost us 12,000 rand to have this up for a month, and it was the first time in my like short history of doing exhibitions where the exhibition was up before I even got to the the country or the place where the exhibition was meant to happen. So it was up a week before. We then traveled to Lesotho and had this presentation, which for us was like a really another direct, literal example of like kind of blurring these boundaries between formalized art space and like the like greater publics out there. It was well received by the people of Maseru. We actually put a ribbon on the pole to do the unveiling. It was like such a lo-fi unveiling, but people actually liked it. So yeah, I mean, and then we go to Cape Town Art Fair this year, beginning of the year, where there we were thinking about trophies and the relationship between trophies as these like totems, objects to victory, and artworks. Because we kind of like hold the same value or hold them in the same kind of like value field, if I can put it like that. The word trophy is taken from the Greek word tropaion, which means turning point, and like the kind of like history of trophies emerges from like when these two sides were in battle. That moment of like when the battle shifts from one side to the other was called the tropaion, or the turning point. And so at first trophies were these like large monuments that people like made out of like armament from the or armor from the like losing army, that they would then like burn and like have them as like these effigies to like to victory. So then they, in over the centuries, they start becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. They become chalices, they become shields, they become like various other things. And so artworks also kind of like have this kind of like yeah, value are held in the same kind of like light as trophies by the people who collect them or people who like just enjoy them. So this became the presentation we held at the fair, where we showed like different variations of trophies, and we have that Vili Besta horse there, which was like my favorite one of the collection of artworks that we showed. We sold nothing, but it was yeah, it was a nice moment for us to like show up at the fair where we were always on the periphery, and we were fine with being on the periphery, but like for this moment we had literally center stage as you entered the fair, like the works were right there. And then, yeah, we come to what's been the latest exhibition that I've worked on. This one I did was at Smoker. This is the initial title of the exhibition. Spring is Rebellious, for those who know, was the title of the anthology of an anthology that was really published in '89, which Albi's essay "Preparing Ourselves for Freedom" was part of. So the anthology was titled "Spring is Rebellious: Arguments about Cultural Freedom," and this text "Preparing Ourselves for Freedom" was in there. So we were presented with this like project of doing an exhibition using Albi Sachs's collection, um, but also not making Albi like the center of the project. It's just like um, so the collections that are in the exhibition uh, are his personal collection that he built in Mozambique during the years 77 and 88, and the artworks that he collected while he was a constitutional court judge alongside Justice Yvonne Moho, who passed away last year. And yeah, we were just thinking about just the revolution, well, the arc of revolution. And that's why the words resistance, liberation, and transformative humanism appear there. And in working on this, yeah, we kind of like we're going through like different discussions about how to like present on this or like show make an art an exhibition about this man's life, but like not necessarily center him, because what's more important are the histories that are part of the exhibition through the artworks that are there or in the exhibition. And also just to not do this thing that's been done for so long on the African continent, or yeah, particularly is to tell the history of Africa through the eyes of like one individual. And we'll ask questions about why LB, why this white liberal South African man who played a pivotal role in the struggle for South Africa's democracy. So kind of like negotiating all these things at the same time, we eventually end up with yeah, like the exhibition that we have now, titled Spring is Rebellious, The Art and Life of LB Sachs, which we organize around yeah, 3 sections which speak to this like recurring thing, I guess, in like revolution, where or like in revolutionary endeavor, if I can call it like that, where political rev- like the endeavor for political revolution, where begins with resistance, goes towards like liberation, and then transformation becomes like the end point, which then falls back on itself, right? And like we can see in like the history of South Africa alone, the transformation is still something that we're, as a country, we're grappling with. The same goes with Mozambique. I'll just, yeah, this is some of the preparatory kind of like work that we put in there. We're thinking really strongly with the architectural design of the Constitutional Court in Johannesburg, which was designed with this principle of justice under a tree. So even in how the building itself is constructed, you feel like even though you're on the inside, you feel like you're on the outside. So it was difficult for us to translate this feeling because we don't have any windows at the museum, in the exhibition spaces, at least. Yeah, it's a very yeah, it was a very difficult thing for us. But then we worked with kind of like the colors that we could transmute into the exhibition, such as like yeah, bleaching the tones. So in the Mozambique room, which we'll see when I show the installation shots, that would create like the sun bleach kind of feeling and brightness that we wanted to like evoke, because we're thinking also with like protests being something that happens like in the public space predominantly, and we also kind of like featured the facade of the Constitutional Court in one of the spaces. So there was this one space that was meant to be like outside in the public sphere. Then there was another space that was meant to be like a courtyard, which is the curating constitutionalism section. And then there's a study room, which I'll also speak to when we get to it. And then yeah, like some of the languaging in the or typography was also like taken or referenced in the court, but also LB Sachs's own handwriting. Um, yeah, and I guess the scaffolding also comes across in the exhibition design because we have like these pipes, and the exhibition boards are like are placed on these red pipes. So it just like how ideas that one like works with kind of flow into like new like other projects. I mean, when I reflect on like on the work I've done in the last year, I can see like a continuation of these things. So yeah, this is the section on Mozambique. Speaks to like his time in Maputo, and all the artworks that are there are artworks that he collected at the time. And then that mural is was one of the murals that were painted in the public space in Mozambique, because there was like a flurry of like mural painting at the onset of Mozambique's independence. So this is the year 1975, and LB says when he flies into Mozambique, he sees like this, like yeah, vibrancy of like artistic language on the streets of Maputo, or formerly known as Lorenzo Marquez. Yeah, and it's just like various kinds of like thematics that one could pull from this exhibition, but there isn't any time because you know when you in a 9 to 5 you kind of put something on and then you move on to the next. But like this work by Zakhele is really interesting because we have this recurring theme in the exhibition where we have a lot of double-sided works. Not only this one by Zakhele, who was apparently it came out that he worked on both the uh, worked for Frelimo, but also was collaborating with the Portuguese colonialists. So he makes this really like interesting double-sided work where on one side it's like speaks to these like optimisms that were like emerging in the country, but then there's a really dark and surreal side to the work itself. So we kind of show the double-sided like nature of the work itself, but also of like after learning about this artist's history, we're like, oh wow, it's interesting that he even produced this double-sided work. And this is a shot of the dust house, and then we put and the dust house, which features a sonic piece of Albie whistling, the whistle that he would whistle in whistling tune that he would whistle in prison during his first solitary confinement. And then we have this really remarkable timeline which kind of charts South Africa's history, Mozambique's history, alongside Albie's history. So it's yeah, like also we had to kind of like negotiate working with him because uh, I mean, he has his own ideas about how he wants his story being told, you know. And also, like, it's incredible to us how he's done, like, such a great job of like, people were filming him in the 70s, like, before he even lost his arm. Like, they were following him around. So it's like, how do you have such an extensive archive of yourself? Like, like, like how? So, like, it's like, so he's done such an amazing job of like self-archiving or self-writing. You then wonder, like, are you writing biography or are you writing autobiography? Like, or like, what are you doing here? Because like he actively has done that work himself. So it's like, what are we doing as the curators of this exhibition? Are we just working with the archive that because we worked with his archive, like an archive that he shared with us. And this is like an intentional kind of like archive that he's built. So yeah, like these are one of the interesting questions that like we had to like think through as a team. Like, what are we doing the work of like biography or autobiography in this exhibition? Yeah, and then yeah. So we showed these two artworks here by Dumile Feni because they both double sided. So this theme of like double sided works is something that, if given the time, I would like to like. I mean, the reason why he worked double sided is because he couldn't like afford canvas, so he worked on both sides of the canvas. It's different from Zakele, who knows why he produced those two works on both sides. But like, there's this interesting thematic that one would like to dive into from an art historical or curatorial point of view, a critical curatorial point of view, just to like create some thinking around this. And then Albert Adams, I'm just gonna run through, and Victor Gordon, which was in the space. The space was called preparing. It's called Preparing Ourselves for Freedom, after Albie's seminal essay published in '89. This work by Victor Gordon kind of like critiques the categories that then become formalized in the art world. So in order for you to be recognized as an artist, are you well versed at your sexual politics? Do you know semiotics? Do you know like Kant or like Hegel? Like all those cabinets or drawers there like are labeled in these like with the names of these disciplines. So it's a critique of what that paper, which came out in '89, then forms a discourse around South African artistic practice. So we're like also kind of doing this thing where we're asking, what was the intention behind that paper anyways? And was it and did it serve like the artistic production that came out of the country following its publishing? And and lastly, we've got a section called Curating Constitutionalism, Decensus and the Rainbow Revisited. We were just thinking about, and mainly the artworks in this section are from the Constitutional Court Art Collection, which the collection itself was started being built in the year 95. So these are works that are collected from 95 onwards and produced from 95 or from the 90s onwards. So they kind of like coincide with this time in South Africa where the country's going through transition. And a lot of the works themselves like speak to this moment of transition, whether that be in the kind of political orientation of the work. Like, for example, this one, Mandela in New York, which we placed in there. As you can see, like, he doesn't have a really like pleasant expression on his face, with the Statue of Liberty in the background. Amos Miller, the artist who produced this artwork, when Mandela was did his first state visit to New York after becoming, I think either after becoming president or like once he was released from jail. So Amos Miller kind of like follows him around and then produces this work. And we're thinking about yeah, just the incursion of like neoliberalism or like the opening of markets in South Africa. And also what decisions were made to create to facilitate this smooth transition from like apartheid to like a democratic society. And there are other things in the exhibition itself that we can speak to, but like I was saying, the one way in which we brought the inside, sorry, the outside in, is to like kind of like placing this facade of the court. Yeah, and this is no like Zeiss Smoker representative, but like this is yeah. I mean, it was like I said, it was quite. I didn't know where to start in talking about my practice. I just thought if it's like just leaning into the informal request that of this presentation, I thought I should keep it light and maybe yeah, just see where that goes. I mean, I could use some time to read and write. I will lie. But yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
I want to ask about art history. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's been a way in which four of the luminaries on the continent who were curators, Enwezo, uh, PC Silva, Koyo, I would say Chika is still around, who have tried to put together a kind of framing for a new art history across the continent because there is no consolidated sense of what a contemporary arts in art history from the continent looks like. So we have regional, reckonings with art history, but we don't have um, a project that holds this together. So what I was finding fascinating is to think with you about what an art history might look like. If one took, currents, I see elements, for example, of Dadaism that went to sleep in Europe but continued as a way to think through the problems of nationalism as it ran aground on the continent. And there are many other ways to think about the Shibumba in the Congo, that did that wonderful work around Lumumba and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, if you were to help us at the university who are mostly visually illiterate, I speak mostly for myself here, to kind of think about how one might begin teaching a, through this aesthetic, a way of rereading the continent and its promises and failures and so on and so forth. What about this? So, and partly, the juxtaposition between this LB exhibition, which I think you've done an incredible with your team, an incredible job of, because I think it's a very complex terrain you're entering there, but particularly because that debate, Spring is Rebellious, is not over yet. And it is interesting how the term humanism got deployed in that, configuration of Albi's narrative of liberation and law. That set alongside that exhibition you're doing on with the stuff that I also kind of saw on the soccer stuff, I think there's something about what you might be navigating that would be helpful for us to hear a little bit about. So where would you kind of help us to think about placing this in relation to forming an art history that I think was the process that was begun by those earlier curators that, we sadly lost.
Thank you, Primesh. My doctoral thesis was about the curatorial strategies and pedagogies that we have seen kind of like emerge in the from the late 80s onwards, since from the like what the from the moment that we see the contemporary African art world take prominence right in the global conversation. So I looked at Koyo's work closely. I looked closely at Koyo's work, Ntone Ejabe's work, as well as Gabin Mobo's work. So these were my three focal points for my study. And in that, Primesh, and like looking closely at Koyo's work, these were some of the questions that she would put forward. Like, how do we make, or how do we think about an African like art history? And there is a book that thinks to this question specifically. And she actually founded her space, Raw Material Company, to address some of these like questions. And I think, yes, it does lie within what ends up becoming like a Black curatorial practice, what I at least argue to be like Black curatorial practice, to exist within this like liminal, kind of like fluid space. It's difficult to really make sense of an African art history when the art forms that emerge from the continent are so dependent on the context, and also the specific demands that are context, geographical, political, social, cultural kind of like demand from the artist. So it's hard to consolidate that one thing in the same way that Western art, the Western history or Western art history has been consolidated over the centuries. So I think that gives people like myself and other curators who work within the formal institutional spaces, but also do this kind of academic scholarly work to try and consolidate the practices that are coming out of the continent, the opportunity to kind of have a say in what ends up becoming like a practice or a recognized canon. If you look at Albi's exhibition, some of the works that are in there, we have like Dumile Feni's, we have Albert Adams, South African modernists who are like, who constitute like the basis or of a South African canon at least, which speaks to like a larger African art canon when looked at together. However, then you find an exhibition match where we have more like diverse and practices that are coming out now in the contemporary, which are very different in their like medium and like artistic articulation from what we see in the modernists like modes of production. So, and then curatorial practice becomes this other mode of like translation, which then creates a lens at which we can look at African art or African contemporary art. You know what I mean? So it's like this when I started this, like, I guess this research, the field was burgeoning. It was still like on the rise, and it still is. I mean, but I think, yeah, there's a lot that is will be left unconsolidated for a long time, and yeah, yeah, that's what I think. Yeah. That's what I think. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Condition report
Mm.
on art histories in Africa is like such a seminal work of that kind of discussion. And yeah, perhaps I just bring that in to say we can flow from that. You know, there can be more discussions. And because I think to document it is what Koya did so well. She said, publish or you'll perish. And I think that kind of notion of really sort of not only through art exhibition documentation, documenting time, but to document the intellectual kind of question.
Yeah, and if I may just add, you asked what could this kind of practice contribute to how this branch of the CHR is doing in terms of like thinking about the arts. Yeah, like I think what I say when I speak about myself is that I came into this center that is interdisciplinary, as someone who was from sociology and who only knew or understood how to read about or read practice or artistic production through the lens of art history And then I encounter this practice, curatorial practice, which I'm like, oh, it's another field on its own, which allows you to work between and with other disciplines. I think that's something that I've embraced in my work, where I just don't think, like, for example, I use TikTok these days to research. You know what I mean? Which I saw you, lady. I saw you. But no, it's like you, because I take marketer skills, then bring them this side, kind of, and like mediate them using like the rigor of like what is scholarship, if you want, and then disseminate that in ways that are able to, you know what I mean? So this working in the, yeah, in between these multiple disciplines for me has been helpful, but like it doesn't, like that's why I think I ended by saying it. I don't know how one would consolidate that, but I think the contribution would be to bring like a mode of like engaging with different things at the same time. You know what I mean? Using multiple like lenses to think about, to solve a problem. You know, because yeah, now the work that takes place at the museum is largely like project management. But then you realize that there are issues with that, because institutions kind of reward efficiency. But in efficiency, you end up making mistakes because you represent an artist's work, which has this very like specific cultural significance in a very surface level way. Then that work is read by a Ghanaian who knows this history and is like, no, but the Akan is not just the Ashanti. It's the this people. So you know what I mean? It's like also knowing how to like negotiate these things within contexts that are that are just like, yeah, tenuous, if you want, like, yeah. So I guess I don't know if I speak for myself, like knowing how to work in like these tricky contexts, because like someone will say, how do you work at an art fair then you work at a museum? You know what I mean? Because I do work at an art fair with Exhibition Match, which is an MPO, but then we're going to Joburg this year and showing an artist's work, which we're going to sell, because we have to sell that, because that's how we become sustainable. Then the following week, go to the museum, just do an exhibition, just for the public good. You know what I mean? It's just like just negotiating all these like various terrains. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This
Yeah.
is so beautiful. I mean, I'm not a soccer person, but as I'm just thinking about when people talk about Dorke House, the historical Dorke House in Johannesburg, and jazz musicians remember how they would enter Dorke House in Love Street, and there'd be a boxing match in one corner, and a choir in another corner, and a band rehearsing in the third corner. So those spaces of peopling spaces, making life for us, we do not always have different platforms and indulgences of bespoke spaces in order to do these things. So that just reminded me of that in very interesting ways. A quick anecdote is when we had a gig some years ago in East London at the Orient Theatre, and we were like, wow, people really love jazz in East London. This is a really big audience. And it turned out the audience was waiting for the boxing match that was going to happen afterwards. And they're like, how long are these musicians going to take? so there was, so this
there is something there with like what already, like what are people used to, and like what we can bring in those spaces for them to also like consume,
because they're not against it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we can't assume that jazz lovers don't love boxing or boxing lovers don't like things. But I was thinking about what you were saying about the atmospherics of soccer, especially because you were talking about the COVID and its effects, and how, particularly with UEFA and everything, they had to simulate an audience for soccer. They had to simulate the roar of the audience. Sometimes they would have effigies simulating spectators of the game. So I wondered to what degree that scaffolds, as it were, what you're saying about the importance of recognizing what actually creates the football. It's not just the match. I wonder if that then also adds to your project of interdisciplinarity, such that the sonic and the visual and the physical and all kinds of sensuality, sensuousness come into play. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Just on the note of the jazz musicians coming for the jazz performance before the boxing match, we actually had Zambia perform last year at Johannesburg Art Fair, and like he had this 15-minute performance, like standing on the tables, and like people hadn't seen him Zambia in like over a decade. That was insane. But yeah, like we were. Yeah, so like exactly. So we one of the other things that we were concerned about in this project of exhibition match is like like running out of ideas. Like what else can we do? Because it feels like this thing has limitations as in terms of how far you can take it. So we then started to dig into like what makes a football game besides the thing that's happening on the pitch. And so like the supporters, the sounds that are coming out from the stands, when they kick the ball, when they rehearse, or like when they prepare just before going onto the pitch. If you can recall during the CAF tournament last year, all the countries or African countries, because this is COSAFA, this is this is a football tournament just for African countries. So the CAF, so they would like have these like I don't know what you call them, but like when players come out for the game, so each Angola would have its own like routine. Mozambique would have its own routine. South Africa would have its own routine, and they would sing as they kind of like prepare to play. So we're like looking at that as like there's also a cultural kind of like um, expression that is happening from these moments of like getting ready to play. That became like a mode of entertainment for people to like just read into, and then yeah, various other things like from that like advertising boards and like the yeah, just the other things that make the game what it is. So like being able to kind of like detect or like see these things allowed us to find other modes of like interpretation and other things to look at that do with the game of football, but also have an implication on how we read it as a thing. And like there's a lot of like aesthetic or sensuous interplay when you look at what makes up yeah, like these environments or like these atmospheres that we then become so entertained by and watch the game of football, even watch the game of football, make football attractive. And so we use that as like a way to like bring people together.
My question is just about what's next.
Oh, thank you. That's a great question because I'm thinking about that now too. Um, I want to like find more time to like read and write. If I'm being honest, I miss that. I miss that. I miss that time to like think because, like I was saying earlier, like you open an exhibition at the museum, and then you move on to the next thing, and you can't even like we produce like knowledges from these exhibitions, but like we can't even like read into them because you're going on to the next thing. So I'd like to find the time to like dig deeper into that question of like scaffolding and public space art, which was just an entry point into think about public space art at large. We have a exhibition matches doing something at Joburg Art Fair, which I mentioned earlier, which is about the number 9 in football as a like yeah, that's something that we're having as a like I guess the at face value, but we're looking at dreams and like the dreams that happen, the work that happens that goes into dreaming and like the bedroom as a space. And so like like because you know like every child growing up wants to be that Luis Ronaldo number 9 to score that winning goal. But you see, it's more than that. It's about aspiration. It's about hope. It's about dreaming. So the presentation which we'll have at the fair is we'll have a bedroom with artworks of like all these famous number 9s. But yeah, we're just trying to think about dream work and like, yeah, aspiration. And then, yeah, Zora Opoku is opening at the museum on the 11th of September, who's a Ghanaian German artist who works largely in textile and fabric. But what I want for myself is to read and write for, like, if I'm being honest. Thanks for the question, Candice.
Say, I mean, we one of the possibilities that we should think about is Ukwanda Sipokai's here. I mean, they've just come back from their big 20,000 kilometer journey with this wonderful project, you know, is that hasn't had, I mean, there's been some airing at Michaelis and so on, but, you know, a proper engagement of art on the move. But the other one we need to talk about is Bruce Lee in Africa.
Yeah, we have an artwork from the Handspring Company in the exhibition.
Oh, the
which I
Dogs of
showed.
War.
Yeah, the Dogs of War. Like that alone I think is a starting point for us to think about puppetry in the museum, or yeah, as a curatorial kind of like project that we initiate together. Yeah. Thank you. Yo, I can't believe I spoke to all these people that I know that know me. I can't like scam you guys. You guys know me too well. So I just like yeah, I guess just spoke to you like about what I've been doing. It may have been anecdotal, but like yeah, thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you.
Phokeng, you got to give us your prediction for Sunday.
That's Liverpool versus Arsenal, right? But you know, I mean Arsenal, of course, all the way.